The entire thing has been a witch hunt.
A Justice Department special counsel and several congressional committees are investigating Russian meddling in last year's presidential election, along with allegations Trump campaign officials colluded with the Russians. Allegations President Donald Trump and Russia both deny.
We are going to get to the bottom of just what the Russians did and how they did it, and whether there was any coordination or collusion with U.S. persons, including those associated with the Trump campaign.
U.S. investigators are looking into contacts between several current and former associates of Mr. Trump and Russian individuals. Some of those Russians have direct ties to the government or state-owned entities. But in Vladimir Putin's Russia, links to the Kremlin are not always direct. The Russian government controls the commanding heights of the economy through state-run firms, and observers say the Kremlin also commands the loyalty of prominent oligarchs. So who are the Russian figures at the center of these investigations? Firstly, Sergei Kislyak. He was Russia's ambassador to the U.S. since 2008. He completed his post in July. Prior to his post in Washington, Mr. Kislyak was Russia's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Kislyak is a key figure in the investigation and has been in contact with a number of Trump associates. Attorney General Jeff Sessions met with Mr. Kislyak twice last year, he said in his role as a senator, not as a Trump campaign surrogate. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn spoke on the phone with Mr. Kislyak in December about a potential lifting of U.S. sanctions on Russia. Mr. Flynn denied sanctions were discussed, then resigned after transcripts of the calls emerged. And Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, met with Mr. Kislyak twice last year.
I did not collude with Russia. I had no improper contacts.
Sergei Gourcuff, the head of a Russian state-controlled bank, VEB. Mr. Gourcuff graduated from the Academy of the Federal Security Service of Russia, a school that's groomed Russia's top intelligence officials. He later worked for a Russian oil giant and another state-controlled bank before taking the top job at VEB. VEB is viewed by Russia analysts as a vehicle for the Russian government to fund politically important projects, including the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. A VEB executive in New York was sentenced to prison last year after pleading guilty to conspiring to act in the U.S. as a Russian agent without notifying U.S. authorities. VEB is also under U.S. sanctions. Mr. Kushner met Mr. Gourcuff in December on Mr. Kislyak's recommendation. According to Mr. Kushner, Mr. Kislyak said Mr. Gourcuff was, quote, someone with a direct line to the Russian president, who could give insight into how Putin was viewing the new administration and best ways to work together. The Kremlin said the meeting did not happen on its behalf. A VEB spokesperson said Mr. Gourcuff met with Mr. Kushner and numerous global financial executives as part of the bank's business strategy. Natalia Veselnitskaya. She says she's a former Moscow regional prosecutor, now a lawyer in private practice. Her client list includes the son of the vice president of state-owned Russian railways. Mr. Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., said that he, Mr. Kushner, and former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort met with her in June last year. Donald Jr. said they spoke about a U.S. sanctions law targeting Russian officials. Ms. Veselnitskaya said she wasn't working for Russian authorities, but said she was meeting regularly with Russian officials, including Russia's prosecutor general, a top official appointed by the Kremlin. The Kremlin said it doesn't know her. She said she attended the June meeting on behalf of Aras Agalarov, a Russian Azerbaijani property developer who organized the 2013 Miss Universe pageant with President Trump in Moscow. Mr. Agalarov's company has been involved in numerous state construction projects, including the stadium for the FIFA World Cup in Russia next year. Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. He heads some of Russia's biggest companies. Mr. Deripaska has been key to helping the Kremlin complete business and infrastructure projects, including the Winter Games in Sochi. According to leaked U.S. diplomatic cables, he's among the 2 to 3 oligarchs Mr. Putin turns to on a regular basis. Mr. Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman, has acknowledged that he once worked for Mr. Deripaska's company as a consultant, but denied working to promote the Putin government's interests. Mr. Deripaska says he and Mr. Manafort never had any arrangement, contractual or otherwise, to advance the interests of the Russian government.